Yeah, so the status of the ECBC code implementation already the ECBC cell members, Ms. Girija has shared it very clearly, what is happening in the country and the way forward. Thank you for that. So before we get into the technical aspects, so today, as you all know, humanity, we are at a crossroads. So one of the biggest challenges we are facing in the next decades is global warming and climate change. So we have been hearing about this lot of international conferences and commitments. So it's basically about whether climate change is going to happen or not. Not it's about whether it's going to happen or not. It's already happening, whether it is going to be 1.5 degree or 2 degree or 3 degrees. And we all know what are the challenges. Chennai, especially, we have faced the brunt of, climate change. I would say, at least to an extent, like floods and droughts and temperature variations. So I don't have to brief you about that. And commercial buildings as well as residential buildings as a whole, the construction sector is one of the largest contributors to global warming and other environmental impacts. Almost like 30 to 50% of the emissions, carbon emissions, are associated with energy consumption and the construction of buildings. So, as members of the building community, or maybe occupants or developers, we all have a very great responsibility, moral responsibility to see what best we can do in addressing these challenges. So we all know that for buildings we have several mandatory codes. We have our development control rules, we have our fire safety, structural safety requirements. These are all mandatory. But till now, there are no mandatory codes for energy. And ECBC and ENS is the first step towards a mandatory code. Now we cannot take energy for granted anymore, energy efficiency. We are at a junction where we need to take a call for the next 20 to 30 decades. What is going to happen? We need to take a call right now, and that's why ECBC and ENS play a vital role. So we are going to cover both ECBC and ENS, the requirements, in the next 2 hours. So I will not get into too much into detail of why we need it, and too many technical aspects will not be dealt. So we will be looking at the concept level, and any specific queries, you can feel free to put it in the chat box, or we can address it in the end of the session. In India, as you all know, energy consumption is one of the major factors for emissions, and buildings, especially domestic residential buildings, contribute 20 to 25% of the overall electricity consumption, and commercial buildings another 10%. So 30% of the consumption is from buildings, and another 30% of the consumption of industries again goes towards manufacturing of the building components like steel or cement and so on. So the impact of buildings is huge. Another critical fact is that in the next 20 years, we are going to almost double the built-up area. So every year, we are looking at almost 8 to 10% of growth in buildings in the built-up area across the country. So even with our current built-up area, we are having power shortages, environmental issues with power generation, coal power generation, and so on. So what could happen when we double the built-up area? So clearly, the business as usual practice cannot be continued if we have to sustainability meet the requirements. So again, in terms of residential buildings, we are looking at adding 3 billion meters square by 2030. And it's like almost like around 2 crores of houses are going to be constructed in the next decade. You can imagine the impact. And not only that, whatever new construction we are having now, typically they come with air conditioning. So gone are the days when we used to have naturally ventilated buildings, especially commercial buildings. Now any typical new commercial building comes with air conditioning, which again almost doubles the electrical load. Even residential buildings nowadays, almost more than 50% of the residences have an air conditioner. So which is like a double impact. We have a built-up area growing as well as the load growing. So that is where the importance of ECBC comes into play. So ECBC is part of the Energy Consumption Act, which we have several requirements, not only for buildings, we have requirements for industries, transportation, and so on. ECBC is one part of the EC Act.
One is bracing.
Right. Now, ECBC, to what buildings does ECBC apply to? So it applies to all commercial buildings with a connected load greater than 100 kilowatt or a contract demand of 120 kVA. So this is the scope applicability as per the central code. Any building with a connected load. So connected load is like the sum total of the entire electrical load in the building. So when you construct a building, when you plan for a building, so you need to estimate what is going to be your connected load. And if that is going to exceed 100 kilowatt, you need to apply for ECBC compliance. Once it is in force, even before you go for your plan approval, you need to comply with ECBC. So when we talk about commercial buildings, so it could be an office building, it could be an hospitality, healthcare building, an auditoriums, education institutions. So except manufacturing industries, all commercial buildings will be covered in the code. Right. And specifically to Tamil Nadu, the code has been customized, slightly customized, and the applicability has been slightly modified. So either a building, if it is more than 100 kilowatt or 120 kVA, or if the built-up area is more than 2000 square meter. So in that case, the code will be applicable.
That's it.
So coming to the compliance part,
I'm gonna
in the ECBC code, we have 3 levels of compliance. So earlier there was this ECBC 2008 code, 2008 version, and 2017 the code has been updated, and what we have now is the 2017
everything
code.
I'm gonna explain you in the
And
next
in the latest code,
that's it for now.
We have 3 levels of compliance: ECBC compliance, ECBC plus, and super ECBC. And ECBC, basic ECBC compliance is going to be mandatory, and ECBC plus and super ECBC could be optional, voluntary compliances. If you want to achieve a higher level of compliance, it's an optional one available. Right. And there are 2 compliance methods. In the code, we have mandatory requirements first, which are mandatory for any building. There is no compromise on that. Mandatory requirements in each section. And then we have 2 options. Either we can go for prescriptive requirement or a whole building approach. So in prescriptive requirements, we need to follow the code compliances to the dot, exactly as per the code. Whatever is stated under the prescriptive requirements need to be followed. Whereas in whole building approach, we have the flexibility between different code provisions, like between the building envelope and HVAC, between the HVAC and lighting. So we have some flexibility to compensate or trade off between different sections of the code. So whole building performance approach, how it works is, again, we have to use a simulation, energy simulation to demonstrate the whole building approach. Whereas in prescriptive requirements, there is no requirement for simulation.
Small thing, okay.
So like I mentioned, in the whole building approach, The compliance is shown by calculating the EPI, the energy performance index. So by simulation, we calculate the annual energy consumption and we divide it by the built-up area, kilowatt hour per square meter per year. So that is the EPI, and the EPI needs to be simulated for the proposed building and the standard building. The standard building is a building which will comply with the ECBC prescriptive requirements. And the ratio between the EPI of proposed and standard design has to be less than 1 in order to comply with ECBC. So in essence, the simulated energy consumption of proposed design should be less than simulated energy consumption of the baseline design. So the code has these 6 major components. The building envelope, that is one of the major component. Then we have your HVAC, lighting, electrical, renewable energy, and control systems. So in all of this, we have certain mandatory requirements and certain prescriptive requirements. Yes. Now moving on to the building envelope. In envelope, there are these 3 factors. So it basically deals with the roof, the wall, and then the fenestration or the glazing. So for the roof and wall, the major requirements are the U value, the thermal conductivity of the wall and roof. Specifications are given. We will get into detail a little later. As well as for the roof, we also have cool roof requirements. Whereas in fenestration, we have window to wall ratio requirements. We have U value of the fenestration, SHGC, that is solar heating coefficient, and VLT. So we have these 4 requirements when we talk about fenestration. So I will not get into the U value calculations in this session. There are tools available which you can use to calculate the U value of different wall materials. So details of this will be if you want a detailed session on envelope and other parameters, there are regular other future sessions being organized, which will be more in depth covering these aspects, and we can deal with that in those sessions. So when we talk about an external wall, so the ECBC says that ECBC provides maximum U value to be compliant. So for a basic ECBC compliance, the maximum allowed U value for an office building is 0.4 watt per meter square Kelvin. And depends on the type of the building and the area, the U value is variable. For example, if it's a school building, less than 10,000, then U value up to 0.85 is allowed. Whereas again, office building less than 10,000 square meter, again 0.63 U value is allowed. So when we talk about U value, typically when we take a normal wall construction, say a concrete block, the U values are around 2.2 to 2.2, depending on the type of material, thickness, etc. So to bring it down to the ECBC level, so either we have to use an insulated wall, or we could use other lightweight construction materials like we have AAC blocks, we have Porotherm blocks, etc., which can reduce the U value to an extent. But to achieve 0.4 in most scenarios, we will have to use some kind of wall insulation. Right. So this is for warm and humid climate, and for cold climates, so in Tamil Nadu we have like the Nilgiris and Kodaikanal, which are falling under the cold climate zone, they have slightly different U value requirements. Instead of 0.4, it is 0.34. Similarly, when we need to achieve ECBC plus level and super ECBC level, then the U values are even more stringent, going up to 0.22. There are some exceptions though. if it is an unconditioned building, then the U value can go up to 0.8. Yes. Now, moving on to the roof. So in roof, we have two requirements. One is the U value of the roof, which basically will deal with the direct heat transfer. And then we have the cool roof requirements. So the U value of the roof, let me come to the table. Okay, sorry, that value table is not listed here. So the U value of the roof, as per the code, it is restricted to 0.33. U value should be 0.33. So here again, a conventional roof U value is going to be around 2 to 2.5. Can I request the participant to mute yourself? Yes.
Sir, sound is very low.
Mr. Arif Khan, can you please mute yourself?
Hello?
Yeah. Yes.
Hey.
Hello. Am I audible? Yes.
Mr. Arif Khan, can you please mute yourself?
Madam, is volume is very low, ma'am. That's why I will. Okay.
Ms. Ginja, is my audio good enough, or do you?
Yeah, I think for us it's good enough. Probably
Right.
some issue with this.
Okay. Now okay, sir.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. Right. So in the roof, the U value requirement is 0.33. So a conventional roof will have a U value of around 2 to 2.5. So again, to bring it down to the level of 0.33, some of the strategies, main strategy would be insulation, it could be a decker or or it could be something like a roof garden. So however, to achieve 0.33, in most scenarios, we will need an insulation. And then the cool roof requirements. The exposed roof needs to be either covered with a roof garden, or it needs to be covered with a reflective coating. It could be a reflective tile or a reflective paint, which is having initial solar reflectance of 0.7 and emittance of 0.75. So basically, an SRI greater than 90 will normally meet these requirements. Yes, so that is on the roof, and the next building aspect is the fenestration. So in fenestration, that is the glazing part. So we have three requirements, as you mentioned. So one is the U value, and then we have your SHGC and the window ratio. So to the code requirements. Yeah. Yes. So as per the code, the fenestration U value should be within 3 watt per meter Kelvin, and SHGC should be less than 0.27. For north and for north direction, it can be 0.5. Similarly, for cold climate, there is a slight, it could be higher. SHGC could be up to 0.62 is allowed. And for ECB, super ECBC, there are more stringent requirements of U value 0.2 and 0.25. So how do you achieve this U value of 3 and SHGC 0.27? So, a normal glazing, when we look at single glazing, the U value is going to be around 5.5 to 6. So to achieve U values less than 3, we have to go with this double glazed windows and high performance glazing. So a normal double glazing will be generally around 3.3 to 3.3, so which is good enough for the compliance. And talking about SHGC, the solar heat gain coefficient, which is a property of, the amount of radiation which is passing through the window. Out of the total radiation hitting the window, the percentage which is transferred into the building. So that ratio is the SHGC, or solar heat gain coefficient. And ECBC says this should be less than 0.27. So how do we achieve this 0.27? Either there are two ways to do it. Either we go for a glass with lower SHGC. There are high performance glass, solar reflective glass, which have a lower SHGC. It could range anywhere from 0.05 to 0.8. So we need to choose a glass which is having SHGC less than 0.27. The other way to do it is we can use a normal glazing, but we need to provide sufficient shading devices like sunshades, either horizontal or vertical shading should be provided, so that the effective SHGC, so this shading cuts down the direct radiation on the window and therefore lowers the effective SHGC of the window as a whole. So there is a calculation methodology given on how to calculate the effective SHGC when providing the shading. So depending on the depth of the shading as well as whether we have a vertical fin or not. So based on this, there are some tables given to calculate the effective SHGC. So with a normal glass also, we can meet the SHGC of 0.27 if sufficient shading is there. Yes. The third requirement in ECBC is the VLT, or visible light transmittance. So like SHGC, VLT stands for the percentage of the visible light which is transferred through a glass or a window. So ECBC says that this VLT should be more than 27. So SHGC should be less than 27 and VLT should be more than 27. These are all prescriptive requirements again. Yes. And this is a mandatory requirement. So ECBC mandates that the U value and SHGC and VLT of a glazing should be tested and certified based upon the ISO 15099 guidelines. So in case if it is not certified, then there are some default values given within the code in the Appendix A, Annex A, Annexure A, which can be applied. But these are very conservative values. So normally in case we don't have the certificate for the entire window, we can use the values of the glass as a conservative option. Yes. Another mandatory requirement is that air-conditioned buildings should be made airtight. So basically, it deals with sealing of the building. The building joints, for example, the window sills, window joints. It could be the gaps between foundation and walls, or it could be any other. In the exhaust fans, when we fix the exhaust fans, there could be some gaps. So all the gaps across the envelope, they need to be sealed properly and sufficiently. It could be any kind of sealing should be used. It could be weather sealing, or it could be any other method of sealing, but the building should be made airtight. So this is a mandatory requirement, and this does not apply to naturally ventilated buildings. The idea is again to minimize unwanted heat, air ingress or air egress. Okay. Now, within the fenestration, there is another prescriptive requirement, which is actually an interesting one. ECBC says that the maximum allowed window to wall ratio is 40%. So, which means that if you are following the prescriptive method, you cannot have a highly glazed building. So if we need a highly glazed building, in that case, then you cannot follow the prescriptive approach. You need to go with the whole building or simulation approach to demonstrate compliance. So again, the idea is that ideal window to wall ratio for Indian conditions is around 40%. That is sufficient to provide good enough daylighting. So anything more than that is going to only result in excessive heat gain. So that's why this requirement is there. And though it does not restrict you to have, you can still have higher window to wall ratio and go with the simulation method to demonstrate compliance. Okay, so like I said, the SHGC, the effective SHGC of shading. So we could have horizontal and vertical fins, and each of these, there are some factors given, tables given, which will help us to calculate the SHGC. So again, the SHGC requirements, there are some exceptions. In case the building is an unconditioned building or an unconditioned room or space within a building, so they can be exempt in case from the U value requirements if their SHGC is within 0.27 and VLT is more than 0.27, and if they have a projection factor, which is basically your shading, if they have sufficient shading for a projection factor of 0.4. Okay, like vertical fenestration for skylights also we have U value and SHGC. U value should be less than 4.25 and SHGC less than 0.35. Now, looking at one of the very critical requirements in ECBC, daylighting. This is a mandatory requirement in ECBC 2017. So, which is going to be actually one of the, I would say, one of the slightly challenging aspects in ECBC is daylighting. So, though it looks easy, for smaller buildings, it could be easy. But when you look at huge buildings, complying with the daylighting requirement could be a little challenging. Okay, when we talk about daylighting, the code says that for basic ECBC compliance, if it is an office building, 40% of the area should comply with the UDA requirements. We'll come to UDA a little later. So 40% of the area should have sufficient daylight. So that is a requirement. And if it is a hotel or healthcare, it should be 30%. If it is a resort, 45%, shopping complex, 10%. And assembly buildings are exempted. So for example, we have like multiplex where we don't need daylight, so they are exempt. Right. So when we say 40%, and it should meet the UDA requirement. So what is the UDA requirement? 40% of the area should meet the UDA requirement for 90% of the daylight time in a year. So when we talk about UDA area, any area which is having their lighting level of daylight level of more than 100 lux and less than 2000 lux. So this is the useful illuminance range, and this is considered as the useful illuminance range, and this lighting level should be achieved for 90% of the daylight hours in a year. So for example, roughly around 3000 hours in a year. That is from morning 8 o'clock to evening 5 o'clock across 365 years. For 3000 hours in a year, we should achieve 100 to 2000 lux for 40% of the area. So this is one of the critical requirements, and generally for thin buildings, when the floor plates are lesser, it's easy to comply, and whereas for when the floor plates are higher, let's say more than 30-40 meters, so in that case this could become a challenge. We need to really from the concept design, it should be really evaluated. So we need to maybe provide some courtyards, or we need to change the shape of the building. So these strategies need to be followed for daylighting, and it is a mandatory compliance. So to show the daylighting compliance, we have two methods. One is the simulation and manual calculation. For simple buildings, simple rectangular buildings with simple windows, we can show by the manual calculation method, and for more complex buildings and buildings with skylights and other shading aspects, it's better to go with simulation method. So this is a typical simulation where in this building, so the yellow highlighted portion, these comply with the UDA requirements. 90% of the time, they have the required lux levels from daylight. So this area should be more than 40%. So this is a calculation approach, manual calculation approach, where depending on the window width and the height of the window, the manual calculation can be done. There is the formulas are given, as well as it's a simple calculation. It's a table given which, with factors, daylight extent factors. Depending on the orientation, we need to use these factors and calculate the daylight area. Right. So that is the section about envelope, and if there are any queries on the envelope section, we can address right now before moving on to the next section. Okay, we can have the queries.
Sir?
Yes.
Can I ask now?
Yes.
Yes, I'm actually a PhD scholar at PSG College of Technology. I'm doing my PhD in energy engineering, sir.
Yeah.
And I want to ask a question regarding this daylight compliance. Is there any particular calculation or simulation procedure that is suggested by the ECBC code, or it can be the discretion of the engineer?
Yes, yes. I mean, for daylight manual calculation, the specific methods have been described in the code.
Yes, sir.
With examples, we have even a case study examples also within the code. And
okay, sir.
Simulation method, again, yes, they have listed out certain software requirements.
Okay.
So basically, it should be, you should be able to, the software should be able to calculate the UDA values.
Okay,
and it should be, able to model like other adjacent buildings also need to be modeled. So there are some requirements given within the code.
Okay, sir. Yeah. So it does not mention that any specific software should be used or any specific algorithm should be applied. Not like that.
Yeah,
there's
no software name listed, but only guidance is given. So any software which is complying with that, you can still, use it. Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much.
Right. The next section deals with HVAC or the comfort systems. So in HVAC, these are the components which are covered. So we have the ventilation, which is mandatory. We have mechanical ventilation and natural ventilation requirements, which are mandatory. Then we have minimum efficiency for the equipments like chillers, VRF systems, and other units, which are again mandatory. And there are some mandatory controls like temperature and occupancy controls and ducting insulation requirements. So let us see that one by one quickly. Yeah, coming to the mandatory part first, what is the ventilation? So all air-conditioned spaces should have sufficient ventilation, that is fresh air, as per the NBC 2016. So basically, it will be giving you the amount of air changes per hour or the CFM per square feet per person. So those norms need to be complied. And if it is a naturally ventilated building, in that case, again, the NBC norms for naturally ventilated building should be complied, like the percentage of openings. Do we have sufficient openings for ventilation and the height of the ventilation openings? These are all specified in the NBC and they need to be complied. And in such spaces, if there are ceiling fans should be BE 3-star rated ceiling fans. And if there are exhaust fans in these areas, they also have some minimum efficiency requirement. Like the efficiency should be minimum 60% or above. Right. Now, from the equipment efficiency point of view, there is one interesting requirement, mandatory requirement specified here, which says that when the total load of the building is less than 530 kilowatt, so that is roughly 150 tons, then air-cooled chillers can be used. If it is more than 150 tons, in that case, air-cooled chiller capacity is restricted to 33% of the total installed tonnage. So the objective here again is, as you know, water-cooled chillers will have better efficiency. So if it is more than 150 tons, they encourage us to use water-cooled chillers rather than air-cooled chiller. So that is one significant requirement here, but there is an exemption in case if the local authority, for example here in the Chennai, if the maybe CMDA allows you to use air-cooled chiller, then you can use it. Because of water shortage or other constraints, if there is an exemption from the local authority, then in that case you can use air-cooled chillers. Right. And yeah, similarly, for each of the equipment, chillers, in case of chillers, it is chillers. In case of VRF systems, it is VRF systems. The minimum efficiency to be followed, the COPs and IPLE values are given. If it is a unitary system like a split AC or window AC, then they need to be minimum BE 3-star rated. If it is a VRF system, again, the efficiency should be minimum EER should be more than 3.3. Depending on the capacity, it varies. If it is a chiller, now the BE star labeling program has been launched for chillers. So, as per ECBC, the chiller should be at least BE 1-star rated or equivalent efficiency. So roughly it will be like for air-cooled chillers, it should be it's something around 4, and for water-cooled chillers, it's something more than 5.5 or 6. So depending on the capacity, if it is less than 150 tons, then there is a range, compliance range, and if it is more than 152 to 500 tons and above. So depending on the size, the efficiency COP value has been specified. So next mandatory one is the time clocks. So this is applicable for any commercial building more than 20,000 square meter, and also universities, education institutions of all sizes. So these buildings should have a automatic timer control system which can operate the HVAC systems based on, for example, morning 8 o'clock should be switched on and evening 6 o'clock should be switched off. So those kind of control should be incorporated in the HVAC. This is mandatory. Then another important requirement is the temperature controls. This is again mandatory requirement for each floor or a building block should have at least one temperature control. And similarly, each room in a hotel and any conference or meeting room within an office building, as well as office cabins which are less than 30 meters square. These kind of spaces should have separate temperature controls. So what we mean by temperature controls is like either they should have individual separate indoor units by which we can control the air temperature, or if it's a centralized AC, then again we need to have something like a VAV control, variable air volume controllers, to regulate the temperature. So this is one of the major requirements which could sometimes impact the HVAC design. This should be taken note of. Okay, occupancy controls. These are again required in certain spaces. For example, guest rooms in a hotel, public toilets for buildings more than 20,000 square meter, all conference and meeting rooms, and education buildings more than 30 meters square. Occupancy control based HVAC operation should be provided. Okay. And it is also mandatory to do a proper commissioning, which will include an air balancing and hydronic system balancing, which is these reports should be submitted for compliance. And in hot water system, especially for hotels and hospitals, out of the total hot water requirement, it is mandatory to have 20% from solar water heating system. So this again could be a little bit of challenge when the hospital, when we have a huge hospital and if the roof area is not sufficient, then meeting this compliance could be a little bit of an issue. Okay, now moving on to the prescriptive requirements. Economizers. So these are required. Economizers are basically devices which can be used to bring in more ambient air, which can be used for free cooling purposes. These are required in certain instances. For example, if the built-up area is more than 20,000 square meter, then economizers are required in certain situations. But it is not required for warm and humid climates. And in case the cooling capacity is less than 3,200 liters per second, those instances it is not applicable. So climates like Bangalore, this is required. Okay. Now, in prescriptive requirements, the code also specifies minimum efficiency for the HVAC systems like pumps, chill water pumps, for the cooling tower fans, for the air handling units. So for all this, there are minimum efficiency requirements such as pump efficiency. It has to be more than 70%. AHU fan efficiency should be more than 60%. As well as the motors used in the AHUs and these pumps, they need to be at least IE2 specified. IE2 efficiency are higher. So these are all again part of the code. And instead of meeting these compliances by each component, like for example, we have to meet specifically for chiller, pump, and AHU. Instead of that, we can also show compliance at the system level. At the overall system level, what is my efficiency? So that option is also available if we want some flexibility. So that was about HVAC. Now moving on to the lighting and lighting controls. This is again one important area because many of the projects, they find difficulty in complying with this mandatory requirements in lighting. There are some controls requirements which are mandatory, and generally it's a bit challenging to meet this. Not challenging, I would say. We need to take a little bit care during the electric and lighting design to comply with these. Right. So some of the mandatory requirements. So we have lighting shut-off requirements like timer controls, occupancy sensors, and minimum number of lighting controls and daylight controls. So many controls requirements are there, and therefore the lighting layout, the lighting, the cabling design, the wiring design, and the location of controls. So they need to be very carefully done because these are all mandatory points. Right. So the first requirement is that 90% of the fixtures in a building should have automatic shut-off, like either a timer control or an occupancy sensor should be there for 90% of the installed lighting in a building. right? Then there are additional requirements for buildings more than 20,000 square meter. There should be separate occupancy based controllers for space, any room less than 30 square meter and any storage rooms and public toilet more than 25 square meter, as well as corridors of hotels and hospitals. They all should have occupancy sensors based control. Okay. Not only these, plus any conference and meeting rooms in any building, they should also comply with occupancy sensor controls. Okay. The next requirement is to have minimum number of light switches. So for example, if you have a space of 1000 square meter, then you need to have a single, at least one switch for every 250 square meter. So for 1000 square meter space, we need at least 4 switches, 4 lighting switches, controls. And if the area is more than 1000 square meter, then we need one switch for at least one every 1000 square meter. Now, in daylight controls again, so in a building or a space, whichever areas are complying with daylight criteria, so in those areas, it is mandatory to have daylight controls. So it could be manual or automatic. So if it is manual, then we should be able to manually switch off 50% of the installed lighting. And this should be distributed evenly across the daylight space. So either it be manual control, either it can be a dimmer or it could be switches, ideally dimmer. If it is an automatic control, again, we have to have a dimmer to reduce the overall illuminance, or it could again switch off 50% of the light fixtures, depending on the lighting level. Right. Now, in exterior lighting control, we have a mandatory requirement of either a time switch or a photo sensor to control the exterior lighting, street lighting and facade lighting. And the lamps used in the street lighting should have an efficiency of 80 lumens per watt. So basically any LED should normally meet this requirement. And additional controls are required in some spaces. For example, if it's a hotel room, we need a master control device, like key card normally. Once you remove the key card, the entire lighting is switched. So this is required for each hotel rooms. When you have task lighting or other non-visual lighting, they should have again separate lighting controls. Okay, those are mandatory. Moving on to prescriptive requirements in lighting. So basically it deals mainly with the lighting power density, LPD. So this is almost like normally we use in other IGBC and other certifications, the LPD. So it's something almost similar to that. The LPD requirements are given for ECBC for different spaces, watt per meter square. So again, we have two methods, building area method or the space by space method. So two methods are there. So the installed LPD should be less than the LPD specified in this table for the type of the building. And generally it is quite easy to meet this. If you are using LED and if you are having a reasonably good lighting lux level design, then it's easy to achieve this LPD. Normally we get a good number of savings from the lighting section. This is a space by space method in lighting. So the LPD is given for the different types of spaces within a building. We can comply with either of these. Okay. So if you are going for higher level of compliance, ECBC plus or super ECBC, then there are some additional controls given. control requirements, and also lighting efficiency requirements for lumens per watt. For super ECBC, it should be more than 100 lumens per watt. Okay, so that was about lighting section, and now the electrical section. So in electrical section, all of the requirements are mandatory. So there are requirements for transformer, voltage drop, UPS, motors. We'll see them one by one. Okay. So in transformers, the code mentions the maximum allowed losses for both dry type and oil type. There is a table given. So the efficiency of the transformer should be within the code requirement. For example, we should have a certificate of what is the transformer loss at 50% loading and 100% loading, and that should be less than the given values. And this, so before you specify the transformer, you need to specify your loss at 50% and 100% loading. Okay. And there are voltage drop requirements. So when we design the electrical system, in the feeders, the voltage drop should not exceed 2%, and branch circuit it should not exceed 3%. And transformers, after installing the transformers, the transformer loss should be measured using class 0.5 calibrated energy meters. As well as for continuous loss monitoring. So for example, you may have to monitor your transformer loss every 6 months or 1 year. So for that purpose, additional CTs and PTs should be provided in the transformer primary and secondary side. Motors, the minimum efficiency of motor should be IE2 or higher. So nowadays IE2 motors are very common. So that's pretty easy, but this has to be specified and ensured. So any motor, it can be a pump or it can be any HVAC equipment. So they should comply with IE2 efficiency. And for ECBC plus super ECBC, IE3 and IE4. DG sets. So again, code specifies if the building is more than 20,000 square meter, then at least 3-star rated DG should be used. Okay. Another mandatory point is the check metering provision. So basically, apart from your meter provided by the TANGENCO, normally each building will have a billing meter provided by TANGENCO. Apart from that, we need to provide our own internal meter to monitor our energy consumption. So this is mandatory. So that meter should be an energy meter capable of measuring kWh. And if it is a bigger building, then smaller building only kWh. If it is bigger building, we need to monitor other parameters like power factor, kW, kVA, and all that. And larger buildings, we need to also monitor the harmonics. So meter with such capability should be installed for internal metering purpose. Okay. Now we also need to have separate meters for the major loads like HVAC, interior lighting, hot water, etc. In case our load is more than 250 kVA, then we need to monitor all the major components, lighting, HVAC separately, submetering should be done. So again, for specific buildings, then again, if it's a data center is there within the building, that has to be submitted separately. And shopping complex, we need to again submit our elevators, escalators, and so on. Okay. In terms of power factor, should be maintained between 0.97 and 1. This is mandatory. Sufficient capacitors should be provided. And in terms of the electrical cabling design, So code specifies the maximum allowed losses, the cable losses. So cable loss should not exceed 3% for the basic compliance and 2 and 1% for the higher level of compliance. So cable sizing should be done and calculation should be used to demonstrate at full load, cable loss will not exceed 3%. And UPS, like your lighting UPS or your system UPS, so all the UPS should comply with the minimum efficiency, which is 90.2%. Again, depending on the capacity, it varies from 90 to 94%. So this again should be specified. And whenever there is a star labeling available for UPS, then that will take precedence over these values. Okay, and this is the final part in the electrical section, which is a renewable energy systems. So it is mandatory to allocate space for renewable energy in the roof. We need not install the renewable energy system, but space should be allocated. So space of 25% of the roof area should be allocated, or 1% of the total peak demand. That is sufficient space to meet 1% of the total peak demand. Either of these should be allocated. And not only space allocation, we need to also install the required electrical provisions for any future installation. For example, we need to have some electrical, parallel grid connected parallel systems. We need to have some sufficient electrical provisions there on the rooftop, so that in future we can easily connect the system, as well as structural provisions. So is the roof capable of supporting the panels or renewable energy? So those structural provisions also should be taken care. This is mandatory. Okay, and when doing the allocation, in the plan approval drawings, we need to also earmark where my inverters, if it is a solar panel, then where my inverters are going to be placed, what is going to be my routing, electrical service routing. So all those things need to be indicated in the drawings. Yes, that brings us to the conclusion of ECBC. The first part is now completed, and I'll be happy to address any queries in this first part. So to summarize the ECBC code for commercial buildings, so any building more than 100 kilowatt or 120 kVA or more than 2000 square meter in case of Tamil Nadu, they need to comply with ECBC. And we have 3 levels of compliance. ECBC is mandatory and these 2 are voluntary. And if we have any co-residential buildings, for example, normally tenant occupied buildings. So in that situation, so whatever is within the developer's control, they should comply with ECBC. For example, the envelope, if you have your HVAC, common area lighting, all those should comply. And for the tenant scope, in the agreement, in the tenant agreement, the ECBC provision should be made mandatory. You should ensure that the tenants follows the ECBC code requirements. Okay, so in envelope section, the mandatory requirements are for the fenestration or glazing. We have the U value, SKGC and VLT, which has to be tested. We need tested values. We need the U value of the wall and roof to be tested, or else we need to use the default values. Daylighting, this is one of the main requirements. Daylighting should be there for at least 40% of the area if it is an office building, and lesser if it is a different type of building, it is slightly lesser. And building ceiling, building should be airtight. In prescriptive requirements, the U values have been given. For the roof, it should be less than 0.33, and we should use a reflective cool roof or roof garden. Wall U value should be less than 0.4. Again, if it's a different climate like Bangalore, then slightly higher values are allowed. The glazing window to wall ratio should be less than 40%, VLT more than 27%, SIGC less than 0.27. U value should be less than 3. And skylights again. In terms of lighting, the mandatory requirements are automatic timer or occupancy controls, occupancy sensors for specific type of spaces like conference rooms, toilets, etc. Then additional controls are required for daylight areas. Then we have the LPD requirement under the prescriptive section, lighting power density. In HVAC section, we have these mandatory ones, the ventilation, the minimum fresh air should be there. We should have BE 3-star rated fans and efficient exhaust fans. And parking spaces, if we have basement parking more than 600 square meter, then CO sensors are mandatory. Demand control ventilation, this is mandatory in certain situations. Minimum efficiency for the equipment like chillers, VRF, computer room air conditioner. Time clocks, again for more than 20,000 square meter buildings, time clock should be there. Separate temperature control for each space. Occupancy sensors, again for certain spaces. VFD controls for the cooling tower fans. Minimum level of insulation for the pumping and piping and chill water pipes and ducts. And solar water heating, minimum 20% of the overall requirement should be there for basic compliance. And if it is more than 20,000 square meters, then 40% of the hot water requirement should be from solar. In prescriptive, again the efficiencies are specified for AHU fans, for chill water pumps, cooling towers. All these specific efficiency norms have been recommended or prescribed. So electrical system, we just saw this section. So these are the ECBC requirement for commercial buildings. And next we'll move on to the ENS or Econeva Samhita, which is applicable for residential buildings. So if there are any queries here, we can address quickly before moving.
Sir, Paul Gregory again. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I have two questions. Are there any ECBC compliance norms regarding the orientation of fenestration with respect to the direction of solar radiation? Because you had mentioned that window wall ratio of 40% and below is optimal for glazing. How should I actually design it, sir? Because with the direction of solar radiation, I will be planning for more of incoming solar radiation. So more of window wall ratio should be oriented towards the direction of solar radiation, or it should be the other way. Are there any ECBC complaints norms regarding that, sir?
All right. Okay. So actually, the glazing design is a what to say, a separate subject in itself. In fact, so
Okay,
I mean,
sir.
yes, from ECBC point of view, or from general point of view, I mean, generally the glazing we should minimize towards the radiation should be minimized. For example, east and west, ideally
Yes,
we should
sir.
be the minimum number of glazing, and north and south, it's better to have the maximum number of glazing because the direct solar radiation is not there. So
Okay, sir.
the objective of glazing is again to mainly have the daylight and the views. So when you give it on north and south facades, uh, the direct radiation is not so much. So therefore you get lesser amount of heat and a good amount of daylight. So that
Okay,
is the
sir.
idea. And that is why if you look at the code also, it specifies, let me put it up. So if you look here, the main concern here is the radiation, which is taken care by the SHGC, solar heat gain coefficient.
Okay, sir.
So here code says that any non-north direction, so basically east, west, and south, the SHGC should be less than 0.27.
Okay, sir.
So you should provide sufficient shading, or you should use a low SHGC glass in those directions. Your building is there. And for north, you can go up to 0.5 because normally direct radiation is limited on north direction.
Okay.
So up to 0.5 SHGC is allowed. So this is what the code says.
Okay.
And the window to wall ratio 40%. Again, ideally, this 40% should be more should be towards north and south. That is the ideal one. But again, depends on the direction. There are constraints. Obviously, you have to go for east and west also. If your building is facing, say, east predominantly, then you have to obviously go put glazing on east, which is also okay. But in that case, you have to use a low SHGC glass. Yeah.
Okay, sir. So my last question is, you had stated that 25% of the roof area must be allocated for renewable energy, preferably for solar. It can be random, or any other factor has to be considered for allocating, sir, because the height of the wall, that plays a role, and the height of the adjacent buildings, that also plays a role, because if the region which is allocated, 25% of the region which is allocated falls in a shadow zone, then that part might not be useful for energy generation. So is there any ECBC norms regarding that, sir?
Yeah. Yes. So it specifies that, I mean, renewable energy can be anything. It can be solar, or it can be even like a small micro wind. So that also could be there. So it specifies 25%. And yes, ideally it should be, if it is solar, it has to be ideally a shadow-free zone. Yeah. So that should be the first preference. Yes.
Considered.
But if there is no other choice, there is no other area, then even partly shaded area we can still install or allocate for solar. So something is better than nothing. Like if it is fully shaded, obviously there is no point. But at least if it is more than 4 hours per day, if you are getting radiation, that is good enough. Yes.
Okay, sir. Okay.
Panels can generate even indirect light. Can generate power. Yes.
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir. That is all from my side.
Okay, so if there are no other queries, we move on to the ENS section, Ecode Niva Samhita. Yes, so is the ENS presentation visible?
Yes, Mahesh.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Right. Okay. So as we mentioned in the beginning, commercial buildings only constitute around 9 to 10% of the overall electricity consumption in the country, and whereas 25% is from the residential building. So though the intensity-wise commercial buildings consumption is more intensity-wise, but residential buildings, when you take aggregate, their impact is more. And this particular decade is very important for residential buildings. We are looking at almost, I think, around 2 crore buildings, 2 crore affordable housing, or overall 2 crore housing is required in the next few years, or being planned to be constructed before 2030. So you can imagine, most of these are affordable housing. So and these are going to stand for the next 50, 60 years at least. So this is a very crucial point. We need to adopt this efficient design mechanism, and it's high time to incorporate ENS into our designs. So Econova Samhita, this code, actually there are two sections of the code, part 1 and part 2. The part 1 of the code was launched in 2018. So the part 1 deals with the building envelope, only the building envelope. And part 2 of the code deals with the services section, your common area services, as well as your interior lighting, appliance, fans, and so on. So now both of the codes are available. This will govern the envelope portion, and this will be governing your rest of the common area services and the services portion of the building. Okay, so here again, the main theme or the concept behind ENS is that residential buildings should provide sufficient comfort, whether they are air conditioned or not. So most of the residential building normally they are not air conditioned. So even in those situations, comfort should be provided, sufficient comfort should be provided, especially affordable housing when we see. So there is a very less possibility people are going to install air conditioners there. But comfort is a very important parameter. We cannot compromise comfort to reduce energy or save energy. So how do we provide the sufficient amount of comfort and at the same time reduce energy? So that is an important element in ENS, and it is taken care in the building envelope section. So some of the three important factors which have been addressed are, one is the heat gain through the windows and the daylight, whether sufficient daylight is provided and sufficient ventilation openings are there or not. Are we having sufficient cross ventilation openings? And then the envelope as a whole, whether the conduction heat gain, is it minimal? So conduction heat gain through the wall and roof, then the radiation heat gain and ventilation and daylight. So these aspects are covered in the ENS. Right. So first, the scope of the code. So this code applies to any residential building with a plot area more than 500 square meter or a built-up area, plot area or built-up area more than 500 square meter, and the connected load more than 100 kilowatt. So in such situation, the building can fall under this code, and even it could be even an individual bungalow. If the plot area is more than 500 square meter, then ENS needs to be complied, or it could be even a 8-unit apartment. Even that could fall under the ENS. So any hostels, they are not included. Dormitories, hostels are not included. Again, hotels, these are all covered in the ECBC code. So in ENS, we are talking only about private housing. Okay. So again, as I said, these aspects, components are covered in the code. So first is the building envelope section, and then the common area section. Common area equipments like the lighting, the elevators and pumps, transformers, electrical distribution system. Then we also, it covers indoor lighting, air conditioners, if it is within the scope of the developer, lighting and air conditioners, and service hot water and renewable energy. This is an optional one, solar hot water system and solar photovoltaic systems. Okay, as I mentioned, the objective of ENS is to provide comfort, better comfort, and reduce energy consumption. So comfort is a very important aspect here, because nowadays we have so many options when it comes to choosing a residence. There are so many developers and so many options. But how do we compare between two properties. When we take a car and we want to buy a car, we can main factors we can easily compare. We can compare the mileage, can compare other features. When take a building, we can compare it in terms of cost and materials. But comfort-wise, there is no standard. So one developer can offer a very high-end apartment, but what is the comfort level there? Similarly, another developer can offer at a reasonable price. Again, what is the comfort level over there? So how do you measure it? So there is no basic rule here or standard here. That's where ENS will be will set a benchmark or baseline for all buildings. And therefore, a good design, a developer with a good design can easily comply ENS compared to another developer, and it could have advantage for them. So, and also all the properties need to upgrade themselves. So that will provide a level playing field for all the developers or property constructors. Right. So part 1 of the code, as I mentioned, covers 3 essential aspects. One is adequate natural ventilation, and next is the adequate daylight, and thirdly the heat gains. How are we limiting the heat gains? So this code talks only about, in this code there is no simulation method, there is only prescriptive compliance method, and then we have a point-based compliance. So we'll talk about it a little later. There is no simulation requirement here. And the compliance can also be demonstrated. All these prescriptive calculations and compliances, they don't need to be done manually. There is an online tool available, econiverse.com. So once you feed in your property details, like what is your, the area of the building and your window area, material details. So once you feed in that, this is a very simple tool like a drop-down menu. You need to enter your values, and it will automatically calculate your compliance. So it's pretty easy. Within a couple of hours, you can simply check your compliance. Okay. So in the code, we have these 5 code provisions. So first is the window to floor area ratio, openable window to floor area ratio, which is what is the important term here, openable window to floor area ratio. Then we have VLT, which is also related to window to wall ratio. Then we have the U value of the roof, thermal transmittance of roof. Then RETV, residential envelope transmittance value. And for cold climate, again, U envelope. For cold climate, RETV is not applicable. Instead of that, there is a U envelope given, formula given. So these 5 parameters need to be complied. So openable window to floor ratio, when we talk about it, what we mean is the area of the openings, like the openable window. For example, if it is a sliding window, only 50% of the area is openable. So those openable area. You can also add your balcony doors. So the total openable area divided by the carpet area, that will be your openable window to WFR. This has to be within so those exact values we have not put here, but generally it varies depending on the climate zone. So for example, for warm and humid climate like Chennai, this ratio should be less than, it should be more than 16%, 16%. So generally, when we provide sliding windows, it will be difficult to achieve this compliance. So with sliding window, if you have to comply, then you have to increase your window area, overall window area. So when you provide openable windows, then this could be a bit easily achieved. This is one very important requirement. And all these are again mandatory. This is one. And then next one is the VLT, which is also depending on the window to wall ratio. So the VLT of the glass, the code gives some specific requirements. It should be depending on the window to wall ratio. If you have a very low window to wall ratio, then your VLT should be minimum 0.27. If you have a little bit higher window to wall ratio, then your VLT can be slightly lower. So depending on window to wall ratio, the VLT requirements are specified. So generally, normal glazing should be sufficient, or if you are providing a very high, solar controlled glass, so minimum should be, the minimum VLT should be yes 0.27 or higher. So you should not go below that. Third one is the U value of the roof. U value of the roof should be less than 1.2 watt per meter square Kelvin. So again, here we need to again look at some basic insulation or a roof garden to achieve this U value of 1.2. So generally for high-rise buildings, the roof area will be relatively smaller. So this will not be a big aspect. We can provide an underdeck or overdeck insulation and achieve this. Okay, now the fourth one and the very important one is the RETV, residential envelope transmittance value, and this depends upon, this covers three components. This covers the solar radiation through the windows and heat transfer, that is the U value of the window. Solar radiation means we're talking about SHGC or equivalent SHGC of the window, U value of the window, as well as the U value of the walls. So these factors, as well as it also considers the orientation of the building and what kind of shading is there for the building. So these 6 factors are captured in one single term called RETV. And how is it done? So this is the formula to calculate RETV. You don't have to actually do the calculation. Again, as I said, the online tool can do the calculation. We need to enter the values like what is the area of my wall, what is the area of my window, what is the U value, and what is the SHGC, as well as what is my orientation. So based on this, the RETV will be calculated. And this RETV should be less than 15 watt per meter square Kelvin for achieving compliance. Okay. All right. So this RETV, again, this will be influenced by various factors. One, what is your window to wall ratio? If you have a high window to wall ratio, excessively high window to wall ratio, then it may be difficult to meet RETV compliance. In that case, you may have to use low SHGC glass. And another aspect, what is your wall material? Are you using, what is the U value of your wall? If you are using conventional concrete blocks or bricks, then it could be little difficult to achieve the compliance. We have to, ideally, if you are using something like an AAC block, then it will easily comply with RETV. And similarly, the shading. If you are using low SHGC glass, then you may not need a lot of shading. If you are using a normal glass, then you have to use good amount of shading. So the shading, your wall material, as well as your window glass material, and your orientation. So if more windows are placed in north and south, then that will be advantageous to comply with RETV. So these factors will determine whether you comply or not. So generally, even if you are meeting, even if you are using your conventional concrete blocks or bricks, you can even still comply with RETV, provided you have an optimal or least window to wall ratio, optimal window to wall ratio, and if you are having good shading for the windows, you can still comply with RETV requirements. But if you are having, higher window area and lesser shading, then you cannot comply. You need to go for then AAC blocks and other things. But most situations, depending on the design, what is your wall area? If it is a small building, your wall area may not be that much. If it's a high-rise building, then wall will take more importance. So depending on all this, we have to determine the compliance. Okay, now for cold climates, instead of RETV, we have some term called as U envelope. This is the thermal transmittance, average thermal transmittance of the envelope. So this is the formula for that, and this will depend upon your window, U value of your window, U value of your wall, and U value of any doors if you have. This weighted average U value should not exceed 1.8 watt per meter square Kelvin in cold climates. Right. So the ENS code has a lot of flexibility. You can use any material and still comply with the ENS. So like I said, it's not that you should use an insulated wall or you should use only like AAC or Porotherm. Even with conventional material, you can still comply if your design is optimal. So that was part 1. Now moving on to the part 2 of the code. So here we talk about building services, common area lighting, elevators, pumps. Indoor use, we talk about indoor lighting and comfort systems like air conditioner, and then renewable energy system. Okay, so here also again for the code compliance, the type of buildings can be divided into 3. One is low-rise building, less than 4 stories, low-rise building, affordable housing, and high-rise buildings. So depending on the category, the points to be achieved are given in the code compliance. So here, as I said, one is prescriptive requirement approach, and then we have a point-based approach for compliance. So in both aspects, the mandatory points need to be complied, and then we can either follow prescriptive or we can follow the points approach. Okay. So mandatory requirements wise, first of all, the part 1, so far whatever we have seen, the RETV, U value, openable window to floor area ratio, all these are mandatory. Then the other mandatory requirements are, one is power factor correction. Power factor should be maintained above 0.97. And we need to monitor the energy consumption of end-use systems, like, for example, your common area lighting, common area systems. We need to have sufficient energy monitoring. Then if there are any electrical vehicle charging systems which are part of the project, it's not mandated to provide this, but if you are providing, then it should be as per the guidelines of Ministry of Power. As well as there are some requirements in electrical system design. We look at that in detail. Okay, so yeah, so therefore the mandatory ones. And coming to prescriptive approach, in lighting systems, in prescriptive requirement, they specify the LPD, again, lighting power density, similar to ECBC. There are 2 options given. Either we can comply LPD or we can comply with the luminous efficacy. which is your lumens per watt. So either of these needs to be complied, and there are tables given. For example, here the common area and exterior lighting, the LPD should be less than 3 for corridor lighting, and for basement it should be less than 1 watt per meter square. And the lumen efficiency, otherwise it should be more than 105 lumens per watt. So basically your LED lighting, generally it's more than 100. And LPD also can be complied when you use LED light without excessive lighting. If you are designing with excessive lighting, then again you cannot comply. Similarly, for other open areas like driveways, again there are LPD requirements in the code. Driveways, stairways, landscaping area, these are to be complied. And again, timer control or a photo switch, this is required to control your external lighting like street lighting. Okay. When there is an elevator in the building, then there are requirements of the efficiency. So wherever possible, we should be using high efficiency motors for the elevator and regenerative drives in the elevators. So here again the IE level efficiency. So it is minimum requirement is IE2 and IE3 and IE4 are recommended for additional compliance. And again, when there are multiple elevators, then group automatic operation is required. Okay, and few other requirements like the lighting, lumen efficiency of the elevator lamps, then automatic switch off. When the elevators are not being used, the lamps and the fans should be switched off automatically. Moving on to transformers, similar to ECBC, here again we have efficiency requirements here. And pumps, minimum should be 70% efficiency, or BE 5-star rated pumps should be used for compliance. Right now, coming to the point-based approach for compliance, depending on the category of the building, whether it is low-rise, affordable, or high-rise, minimum 47 should be scored. For low-rise building, affordable housing 70, and high-rise building 100. So the scoring, we'll get into it. And this is minimum, and beyond this, we can also score additional points. Okay, so here, this is a table where under each section, building envelope, services, and indoor electrical use, there are some minimum points to be achieved. When you are following the points-based approach, these should be complied. And then there are additional points. So maximum points, for example, envelope section is 87, building services. So total, we have 200 points, out of which 70 are mandatory and 130 are additional points. So out of this, for example, if you take a low-rise building, for ENS compliance, we should achieve 47 score. So which means for low-rise building, these common area services will not be applicable. So in that case, this 47 points they should achieve from the envelope section. So once they achieve this 47, then they can comply. They don't have to worry about these building services and all that for low-rise building. Similarly, for an affordable housing, 70 points are required minimum. So here again, they have to achieve all these points, both building envelope section as well as minimum points in the common area. This is to be achieved for the compliance. High-rise buildings, 100 points is required. So out of 100, 70, these 70 are mandatory, and the rest 30 can be from any of these. It can be from envelope, or it can be from the services, or from the indoor lighting or comfort systems. So those 30. So some developers, your scope, you may not have the indoor scope, like the lighting, the interior lighting, interior AC will not be within their scope. So in that case, 70 plus 30 points need to be complied from this, from envelope and the building common areas to achieve total 100. So now going to the points allocation. So in each section, the points are allocated depending upon the performance. So envelope section for the roof U value. So 1.2, that is minimum mandatory. So 3 points are given, and for lower levels of U value, then additional points are given. Up to 4 additional points are available. Similarly, RETV 15 is mandatory. 15 RETV, which is mandatory, for which you get 44 points. And once you reduce the RETV, then you get additional points for that. Similarly, for the U value of cold climate. And similar, coming to common areas, the LPD minimum 3 and 1. So that is maximum allowed. So for which you get the minimum points. And once you achieve lesser LPD, then you can get additional points. Again, other sections also similarly, your common area lighting, your elevators. In elevators, we have additional points if you use IE4 motor, or if you use regenerative lift, or if you use VVF drives. So we can get additional points. Pumps, again, minimum 60% efficiency, and B 4-star is mandatory, for which we get 6 points. And additional 8 points can be achieved if we use 5-star rated or 70% efficiency pumps. Transformers, again, so minimum efficiency as per the table given is mandatory. And when we use oil type 5-star rated, then we get additional points for that. Similarly, wherever indoor lighting is within the scope, if it is achieving the lumen efficiency of 85 lumen per watt, we get 4 points, and additional points when we get higher levels of lumen efficiency. Similarly, indoor comfort systems like ceiling fan, when it is within the scope of the developer, then they should be minimum 3-star rated, 6 points, and then 4 and 5-star rated, we get additional points. Air conditioners, depending on the star rating, again, we have minimum points and then additional points. Okay, now there are some extra points given for solar system if it is provided. So if you provide solar water heating for the top four floors to meet 100% of the top 4 floors of a building, then we get 5 points from solar water heating system. It could be solar water heating, or in case there is a heat recovery system that can be used to generate hot water. So in this case, we get 5 points, and additional points are available if we are able to meet for the top 6 floors or top 8 floors. Okay. Similarly, when we install renewable energy system, allocate space. When we allocate space, that is 20% of the roof area, free of any obstructions and shadows. So here it is clearly specified. It should be free of any obstruction and shadows. So there we get 5 points and additional points when we allocate more area. So that brings us to the end of technical section. And like I mentioned, there is a compliance tool available online. So this is a screenshots of the tool where you can enter your project parameters. What is your location, how many number of blocks, whether 2-bedroom house, 3-bedroom house, what is the carpet area, your wall material, window areas. So all these details need to be captured and entered. And once you enter that, we get a result like this. What is your window to floor openable ratio? What is your VLT? What is your roof U value and RETV? And whether it is complying or not. We get a report and we can check out different combinations. Yes, so that brings us to the end of ENS session. So now we have covered both ECBC and ENS, and